She sat alone in the last row of the church sanctuary, smiling as another couple stood at the altar exchanging wedding vows. Everyone around her seemed genuinely happy, but Emily Harper felt something she had become very good at hiding. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't bitterness. It was disappointment. The kind that settles quietly into the heart after years of praying, years of waiting, and years of wondering if God had somehow forgotten the deepest desire she had never stopped bringing before him. As applause filled the room and the newly married couple walked down the aisle, Emily lowered her eyes and whispered a prayer she had prayed countless times before. "Lord, when will it be my turn?" What she didn't know was that the answer to that question was already moving toward her. And before this story is over, it will challenge everything she thought she knew about love, God's timing, and the difference between a good choice and God's choice. Some stories begin with a dramatic moment that changes everything in an instant. This story began with a prayer repeated so many times over so many years that Emily could barely remember when she first started asking it. At 27 years old, she had built a life most people admired. She had a stable career, a close circle of friends, a loving family, and a sincere relationship with God. She served faithfully, attended Bible studies, volunteered whenever she could, and genuinely believed God's plans were better than her own. Yet there was one area of her life that never seemed to move forward. Marriage. One by one, her friends found the people they would spend their lives with. She attended engagement parties, bridal showers, wedding ceremonies, baby dedications, and anniversary celebrations. She celebrated every milestone with them, smiling in photographs and offering heartfelt congratulations. But every time she returned home, there was a quiet ache she rarely spoke about. She wondered why something that seemed to happen so naturally for others remained out of reach for her. She wasn't looking for perfection. She wasn't searching for wealth or status. She simply wanted a husband who loved God, respected her, and desired to build a Christ-centered life together. Emily never stopped believing. But there were days when believing became difficult. There were nights when she sat beside her bed after prayer and asked questions she felt guilty for even thinking. Had she missed God's will somewhere along the way? Was there something she needed to change? Was she waiting for something that was never meant to happen? Every time those questions came, she would open her Bible, pray again, and choose faith over fear. Yet the waiting continued. Everything began to change shortly after she moved to a new city for work. Leaving behind familiar surroundings wasn't easy, but she saw it as a fresh start. She spent the first few weeks settling into her new apartment, learning her new responsibilities, and searching for a church where she could grow spiritually. After visiting several congregations, she found herself attending Grace Community Church, a growing church known for its strong teaching, welcoming atmosphere, and active young adult ministry. From the moment she stepped through the doors, something felt different. The people were warm. The worship was sincere. The messages were practical and grounded in Scripture. It didn't take long before Emily felt at home. She began attending regularly, joined a small group, and quickly became involved in various church activities. For the first time in years, she felt hopeful about more than just finding a church family. She felt hopeful about the future itself. That was where she first noticed Caleb Mitchell. Most people in the church already knew who he was. Caleb wasn't just another member of the congregation. He was the pastor's son. He led worship on Sundays and had grown up in the church. People respected him. Young men looked up to him. Older members trusted him. Parents pointed to him as an example of what a godly young man should be. At first, Emily didn't think much about him. She simply noticed that he seemed genuine. He greeted people after services. He stayed late to help with church events. He remembered names. He listened when people spoke. He wasn't flashy or attention-seeking despite being someone many people admired. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed more frequently. Sometimes it was during volunteer projects. Other times it was after church services or small group gatherings. Their conversations started casually. A discussion about a sermon. A comment about a ministry event. A shared laugh over something unexpected. Nothing dramatic. Nothing forced. Just two people getting to know each other. As the weeks turned into months, those conversations became longer and more meaningful. Emily discovered that Caleb was thoughtful, intelligent, and deeply committed to his faith. Caleb discovered that Emily possessed a quiet strength and kindness that drew people toward her. They found themselves looking forward to seeing each other. They shared stories about their families, their dreams, their struggles, and their hopes for the future. Soon other people began noticing. Friends smiled whenever they saw them talking. Church members exchanged knowing glances. Even people who barely knew them started making comments. You two seem perfect together. Have you noticed how happy he is around you? I wouldn't be surprised if this leads somewhere. At first, Emily laughed those comments off. But eventually, she began wondering if everyone else could see something she was trying not to assume. After all, wasn't this exactly the kind of man she had been praying for? He loved God. He served faithfully. He treated people well. He respected her. Their values aligned. Their conversations flowed naturally. Nothing about the relationship felt rushed or unhealthy. For the first time in a very long time, the future she had prayed about seemed within reach. As her feelings grew stronger, so did her confidence that God might finally be answering her prayers. The years of waiting suddenly seemed to make sense. Maybe God had been preparing both of them all along. Maybe every disappointment had been leading to this moment. Maybe every unanswered prayer had simply been delayed because something better was coming. And if anyone had asked Emily during that season whether she believed she had found the man she would eventually marry, she probably would have answered yes. Because everything seemed right. Everything seemed aligned. Until one evening changed everything. It happened during a prayer meeting. Nothing unusual occurred on the outside. The service continued normally. Worship music played softly. People prayed quietly around the room. But as Emily bowed her head and began thanking God for the direction her life seemed to be taking, she experienced something she couldn't explain. A feeling, a warning, a question that appeared in her mind without invitation. And no matter how hard she tried to ignore it, it refused to leave. What happened next would force her to confront a possibility she never imagined. What if the man everyone believed was perfect for her wasn't the man God had chosen at all? The days following that prayer meeting passed quietly, and Emily tried her best to push aside the strange feeling she had experienced. She told herself she was overthinking. After all, nothing about her relationship with Caleb suggested there was a reason for concern. If anything, everything seemed to be moving in exactly the direction she had prayed for. Their friendship naturally deepened, and before long, what had begun as casual conversations after church became intentional time spent together. Caleb would often call her during the week just to check on her day, ask how work was going, or share something he had learned during his Bible study. One Saturday afternoon, they met for coffee at a small cafe near the church. As they sat across from each other laughing about childhood memories, Emily found herself appreciating how easy everything felt around him. I still can't believe you tried to preach a sermon to your fourth-grade class, Emily said, laughing. Caleb grinned. I was convinced God had called me to ministry when I was 9. And did they listen? Not exactly. One kid fell asleep halfway through. Emily laughed so hard she nearly spilled her drink. That's terrible. It was humbling, Caleb replied. Probably one of the best lessons I ever learned. Moments like that became common. There was a comfort between them that neither had to force. The more time they spent together, the more certain Emily became that this relationship was different from anything she had experienced before. Eventually, Caleb invited her to dinner. Then another, and another. Neither of them officially labeled what was happening at first, but everyone around them seemed to notice. One evening after Bible study, one of Emily's friends leaned over with a smile. Okay, I have to ask, are you and Caleb together? Emily felt her face grow warm. We're just getting to know each other. Her friend laughed. Emily, everybody can see it. The same conversations were happening throughout the church. People admired them as a couple long before they officially became one. Church members often commented on how well they complemented each other. Some even joked that they were watching a future marriage story unfold in real time. Several months later, Caleb finally asked her out officially. After church one Sunday, he invited her to take a walk through a nearby park. They spent nearly an hour talking before he stopped beneath a large oak tree and looked directly at her. Emily, he said softly, I really value what we've built these past few months. She smiled. I do too. I've prayed about this for a while, and I don't want to keep pretending this is just friendship. I'd like to pursue a relationship with you intentionally, if you're willing. Emily's heart raced. For years she had imagined what this moment might feel like. And now it was happening. I'd like that too, she answered. The smile that crossed Caleb's face made it clear he had been hoping for that answer. As their relationship became official, support poured in from every direction. Friends celebrated them. Church members congratulated them. Their families quickly grew fond of one another. Even Pastor Mitchell openly expressed his approval. One evening after a church event, the pastor pulled Emily aside. "I just want you to know," he said warmly, "I've watched the woman you've become, and I think very highly of you. Caleb is fortunate to have someone like you in his life." Those words meant a great deal to her. Driving home that night, Emily couldn't stop smiling. Everything seemed to align perfectly. The man, the timing, the approval, the shared faith, the future. For the first time in years, she found herself thinking, this must be God's will. But despite all the affirmation surrounding her, something unusual continued happening whenever she prayed specifically about marriage. During normal prayer, she felt peace. While reading scripture, she felt peace. While serving at church, she felt peace. Yet every time she prayed about marrying Caleb, a strange uneasiness settled over her heart. It wasn't fear. It wasn't panic. It wasn't confusion. It was simply a lack of peace. A gentle hesitation she couldn't explain. One night, she knelt beside her bed and prayed, "Lord, thank you for Caleb. Thank you for bringing him into my life. If this relationship is leading toward marriage, please continue opening the doors." As soon as she finished praying, that same unsettled feeling returned. Emily sat quietly. She waited. Nothing else happened. No voice. No vision. No explanation. Just that familiar discomfort. The next morning she convinced herself she was reading too much into it. After all, nobody else seemed concerned. Everyone she trusted believed the relationship was wonderful. Even Caleb appeared completely confident about their future. So she ignored the feeling and continued moving forward. Weeks passed. The relationship grew stronger, and Emily became increasingly certain that she was preparing to spend the rest of her life with him. Then one night, while she was asleep, she experienced a dream so vivid, so unusual, and so impossible to forget that she woke up with her heart pounding. That night, Emily found herself standing in a place she had never seen before. The dream felt so real that every detail seemed vivid. She stood in a long hallway illuminated by soft light. At the end of the hallway were two doors. One door had Caleb's name written clearly across it. The other door had no name at all. For a moment, she simply stared at them. Then she smiled. The choice seemed obvious. She began walking toward Caleb's door, confident and excited. But the moment she reached for the handle, the door suddenly slammed shut. The sound echoed through the hallway. Emily froze. She tried again. The door wouldn't move. No matter how hard she pulled, it remained closed. Then she woke up. Her heart was racing. The room was dark and silent, but the feeling from the dream lingered. "What was that supposed to mean?" she whispered. The next morning, she dismissed it as nothing more than a strange dream. After all, everyone dreams unusual things from time to time. She refused to let it affect her relationship with Caleb. But over the following days, something unexpected happened. During Sunday service, Pastor Mitchell preached a message about obedience. Sometimes, he said, God's instructions don't make sense in the moment. Obedience often requires trusting Him before understanding Him. Those words hit Emily harder than she expected. A few days later, while doing her morning devotion, her eyes settled on Proverbs 3 verse 5. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding." The verse stayed with her throughout the day. Then she heard it again during a podcast. Then again during a Bible study discussion. It seemed to follow her everywhere. Even so, Emily resisted the thought forming in her heart. Why would God bring Caleb into her life only to tell her to wait? It didn't make sense. Everything about their relationship appeared healthy and God-honoring. One evening, while they were walking after dinner, Caleb smiled and glanced at her. "Have you ever thought about where you'd like to live after you're married?" Emily looked at him. "After I'm married?" He laughed. "Well, hopefully someday." She smiled, but her heart skipped. Marriage. The conversation continued. Soon they were discussing future goals, family traditions, and the kind of home they hoped to build one day. For Caleb, those conversations seemed natural. For Emily, they became increasingly difficult. Because while her feelings for him continued growing, so did the quiet sense that God was asking her to slow down. Yet she couldn't bring herself to believe it. Not when everything seemed so right. Not when everyone approved. Not when she cared about him so deeply. Then one afternoon, Emily stumbled across something about Caleb that nobody else seemed to know. And what she learned would change the way she saw him forever. A few days later, Emily arrived at the church earlier than usual for a volunteer meeting. She expected the building to be nearly empty, but as she walked past one of the classrooms, she heard a familiar voice. It was Caleb. The door wasn't completely closed. At first, she wasn't paying attention, but then she heard something that made her stop. "I'm tired, Dad." There was a long silence. Then Pastor Mitchell spoke. "Caleb, we've talked about this before." "I know," Caleb replied. "But I can't keep pretending everything is fine." Emily stood frozen. She had never heard Caleb sound like that before. Not discouraged. Not frustrated. Exhausted. Pastor Mitchell lowered his voice. "People look up to you. The church depends on you. And that's exactly the problem," Caleb said. "I don't even know if ministry is what I want anymore." Emily's heart sank. She quietly walked away before either of them noticed her. The conversation stayed with her all day. For months, she had seen Caleb as the confident worship leader everyone admired. The man who always seemed strong in his faith. The man who appeared completely certain about his future. But now she had seen a side of him nobody else seemed to know. Over the next few weeks, little things began to make sense. She noticed how tired he often looked when nobody was paying attention. She noticed how his smile sometimes disappeared the moment conversations ended. She noticed how often he spoke about expectations. One evening, they sat together after church. "Do you ever feel overwhelmed?" Emily asked. Caleb laughed softly. "More often than you think." "Why?" He stared ahead for several seconds. "Because sometimes I don't know who I am without all of this." Emily looked at him carefully. "What do you mean?" He exhaled slowly. "I grew up being the pastor's son. Then I became the worship leader. Somewhere along the way, those roles became my identity. And that's a bad thing? It can be." He paused. "What if the life everyone expects me to live isn't actually the life God is calling me to live?" Emily didn't know how to respond. For the first time, she realized Caleb was carrying burdens she had never imagined. This wasn't a scandal. He wasn't living a double life. He wasn't cheating. He wasn't secretly evil. The truth was much more complicated. Caleb was spiritually exhausted. He was trying to meet expectations that had been placed on him for years. And deep down, he wasn't sure ministry was where God wanted him. The realization shook Emily. Not because Caleb was a bad man. He wasn't. He was kind. He was sincere. He genuinely loved God. But she began to understand that she had fallen in love with an image of certainty that didn't actually exist. The more she prayed, the clearer everything became. Again and again, she brought Caleb before God. Again and again, she asked for direction. And each time, the answer in her spirit felt the same. Not now. Not him. The realization broke her heart. One night, she sat alone in her apartment, tears running down her face. "Lord, why?" she whispered. Her voice cracked. "Why would you bring him into my life if he's not the one?" No answer came. Only the same quiet conviction. Days turned into weeks. Emily began fasting. She spent extra time in prayer. She searched scripture. She questioned herself repeatedly. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe she was imagining everything. Maybe fear was influencing her. But the more she sought God, the stronger the conviction became. God wasn't condemning Caleb. God wasn't rejecting Caleb. God wasn't saying he would fail. God was simply saying something Emily desperately didn't want to hear. He is not your husband. The truth left her devastated. Because by then, she loved him deeply. She could easily picture a future with him. She could see the wedding, the home, the family, everything. Yet every prayer brought her back to the same conclusion. One evening, Emily sat across from Caleb at dinner, trying to hide the storm raging inside her. Meanwhile, Caleb seemed happier than she had seen him in months. He smiled often, asked questions about her future, talked excitedly about plans and possibilities. As they walked to the parking lot afterward, he reached for her hand. "Emily," he said. Something in his tone immediately caught her attention. He looked nervous, more nervous than she had ever seen him before. And in that moment, Emily suddenly realized something. Caleb was preparing to ask a question that would change both of their lives. And she already knew the answer God wanted her to give. A week later, Caleb asked Emily to meet him at the park where they had officially begun their relationship. The moment she arrived, she noticed how carefully everything had been planned. String lights hung from the trees. A small table had been set up nearby. The setting was simple but meaningful. Emily's heart sank. She already knew what was about to happen. Caleb smiled as she approached. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," Emily replied softly. For a few moments they talked about ordinary things, but Emily could see the nervousness in his eyes. Finally, Caleb took a deep breath. "Emily, these past months have been some of the happiest months of my life." Her chest tightened. He continued, "You've challenged me, encouraged me, and brought so much joy into my life." Then he reached into his pocket. The moment Emily saw the ring box, tears immediately filled her eyes. Caleb lowered himself onto one knee. "Emily Harper, I love you. Will you marry me?" For a few seconds, everything felt frozen. The man she had prayed for. The man everyone approved of. The man she cared about deeply. The man she had imagined building a future with. And yet, despite everything in front of her, she could not escape what God had been speaking to her heart for months. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Caleb's smile slowly faded. "Emily." She covered her mouth as she struggled to speak. "Caleb." The pain in her voice immediately told him something was wrong. "I'm so sorry." Confusion filled his face. "What do you mean?" Emily wiped away tears. "I love and respect you so much." "Then what's wrong?" She looked down at the ring, then back at him. "I can't say yes." The words seemed to hang in the air. Caleb stared at her, as if he hadn't heard correctly. "What?" Emily's voice trembled. "I can't ignore what God has been showing me." His eyes filled with hurt. "You don't want to marry me?" "That's not it." "Then what is it?" Emily struggled to find the right words. "I don't believe we're meant to be husband and wife." The silence that followed felt unbearable. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Caleb stood. His voice was quiet. "So that's it." Emily nodded through tears. "It's the hardest decision I've ever made." Caleb looked away. The disappointment on his face broke her heart. Without another word, he closed the ring box. That night, both of them drove home in tears. The weeks that followed were even harder. Church members were shocked. Some people couldn't understand her decision. Friends questioned her judgment. One friend even said, "Emily, do you realize how rare it is to find someone like Caleb?" Others believed fear had influenced her. A few quietly suggested she had made the biggest mistake of her life. For a while, Emily wondered the same thing. The loneliness was overwhelming. There were nights she cried herself to sleep. Moments she questioned everything. Prayers that felt impossible to pray. But every time she sought God, the same peace returned. Not happiness. Not immediate understanding. Peace. The peace that comes from obedience. Months passed. Then years. Slowly, God began healing both of their hearts. One day, Emily attended a ministry conference several states away. She wasn't looking for a relationship anymore. She had finally reached a place where she genuinely trusted God's timing. That was where she met Ethan Reynolds. Unlike Caleb, Ethan wasn't a pastor's son. He wasn't a worship leader. He wasn't someone everyone expected her to marry. In fact, he was completely different from the picture she had once imagined. But as their friendship developed, Emily noticed something remarkable. There was alignment. Not just attraction. Not just chemistry. Alignment. Their values matched. Their life direction matched. Their calling matched. The more she prayed, the more peace she experienced. No hesitation. No warning. No unsettled feeling. Just peace. Several years after the painful proposal she never thought she would recover from, Emily stood at another altar. This time, she knew she was exactly where God wanted her to be. And for the first time, she understood why God had asked her to let Caleb go. Meanwhile, Caleb's story was unfolding as well. After years of struggling with expectations, he eventually stepped away from ministry leadership. For the first time in his life, he stopped trying to become who everyone expected him to be and began pursuing the path God had actually called him to walk. The decision wasn't easy, but it changed his life. He found purpose beyond the pressure he had carried for so many years. He grew spiritually. He matured emotionally. And eventually, he found happiness in the life God had prepared specifically for him. Looking back, Emily realized something she could never have understood during those painful months. God wasn't taking something away from her. He was protecting her from stepping into a future that wasn't hers. And he was protecting Caleb from doing the same. Neither of them were bad people. Neither of them were failures. They simply weren't meant to walk through life together. Sometimes God's answer isn't based on whether someone is good. It's based on whether someone is right for the assignment He has prepared for your life. Not every closed door is rejection. Sometimes it's divine protection. Sometimes the blessing isn't getting what you want. Sometimes the blessing is discovering later why God said no. Have you ever wanted something so badly that you couldn't understand why God said no? Looking back, did you eventually see His reason? Share your experience in the comments. Your story may encourage someone else who is struggling to trust God's timing today.